We're next going to hear again from the Centers for Disease Control. We're going to have a few presentations and questions afterwards. First, we're going to hear a presentation from Dr. Nancy Messonnier, the Director of the Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, on vaccine safety and effectiveness monitoring. And then from Anita Patel, the Deputy of the Vaccine Task Force on Operational Distribution Plans. Dr. Messonnier.
Thank you, Dr. Monto, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today on this really auspicious day. Despite the completely appropriate size and scope of the clinical trials, it's always important to continue to monitor vaccines post-licensure, post-authorization, and that is certainly especially true with COVID vaccines. So I'm going to talk about the U.S. government plans for monitoring of safety and effectiveness. First, safety. The rapid implementation of safety monitoring under an EUA requires a whole of U.S. government approach with an initial focus on the early populations targeted for vaccination. Voluntary active surveillance of adverse events focused on healthcare worker vaccination and rapid follow-up of reported serious adverse events. As the program continues and more vaccine is given, active surveillance systems will provide increasingly useful information on safety in different populations. Close collaboration of safety experts across the USG will facilitate data sharing and rapid recognition of responses to safety signals. Now, there is a quite extensive plan for safety monitoring, but I'm just going to summarize a few high points. On day one of the COVID-19 vaccine programs, systems will be in place to monitor the safety of vaccine recipients. These include the traditional systems that we use, VAERS, which is a National Spontaneous Reporting System monitored and implemented by CDC and FDA, but also similar programs at DoD and the VA, as well as the National Healthcare Safety Network, or NHSN, which is an acute care and long-term care facility monitoring system. CDC CSIS system is stood up that provides individual case consultation. But in addition, to really enhance this period, CDC has stood up a new system called vSafe. It's an active surveillance tool that uses text messaging and web-based surveys to monitor vaccine recipients for adverse events. Recipients complete brief surveys up to really intermittent surveys to 12 months following vaccination. But then as part of the program, recipients that report a significant health event that impacts their daily activities or leads them to seek medical attention will be called for more information and a report will be generated. This is an opt-in system, and so we're going to have a heavily enhanced engagement around implementation of the program. We really need people to sign on to this system to give us the best data possible. Oops. Large linked database monitoring systems will provide safety data when vaccine becomes more widely available in the priority groups and the general public. This includes, again, existing systems like VSD, the FDA's extensive system, and systems from DoD and VA. We're enhancing this by Genesis, which is a new collaboration with NIH and Brown University to monitor safety in long-term care facility residents. This system operates nationally and has near real-time data for 250 facilities. To look at this another way, this is a table that showcases the systems that we'll be using to monitor safety in the populations that, based on ACIP recommendations, will be vaccinated first, specifically healthcare workers and long-term care facility residents. So you'll see that early on, we have a series of systems to monitor healthcare workers and long-term care facility residents through VAERS. VAERS will be enhanced in this time period, especially around long-term care facility residents, to ensure that we're getting those reports. And then vSafe, which will specifically target healthcare workers. And then you'll see all the systems that are going to be in place for later monitoring in all of those populations. I think the team has done a really good job of thinking through what systems we have, how to enhance those systems, and looking for any weaknesses and attempting to fill them in. And, you know, I'm giving it short shrift by going through it so quickly, but hopefully you'll understand how robust these systems are. In addition, the ACIP COVID vaccine safety technical subgroup was established to provide expert consultation on COVID-19 vaccine safety issues. This group, which we call VAST, was built off lessons learned during H1N1 safety monitoring. The terms of reference and composition have been finalized, and VAST is ready to begin reviewing data once implementation commences. The group is co-chaired by a member of ACIP and a member of the National Vaccine Advisory Committee, or NVAC. There are 10 independent expert consultants that make up the group, as well as ex officio members from NIH, FDA, OIDP, CMS, HRSA, and IHS, and we also have representatives from the VA and the DoD. Now to briefly summarize our efforts around post-authorization vaccine effectiveness. Post-authorization or post-licensure VE estimates are needed to address important evidence gaps from phase 3 clinical trials, particularly for secondary endpoints that may not be adequately addressed. For example, the trials may be limited in their ability to address a VE against secondary endpoints like infection transmission or in subpopulations, and we won't have great data early on the duration of protection. We also believe it's important to evaluate the real-world performance of vaccines, as protection may differ from efficacy under trial conditions. So, this table attempts to lay out the VE policy priorities that were determined based on consultants with policy experts and internal and external experts. The most immediate priority is to determine whether the vaccine protects against symptomatic disease as expected based on the phase 3 trial data, but understanding that implementation for these vaccines might be slightly complicated by folks who don't exactly get the second dose exactly on schedule and by the necessity to keep the vaccine in cold chain. So that's going to be the focus, but then there are a variety of subsequent and late stage studies that are being planned or implemented. A number of strategies are used to plan for the assessment of VE, but to facilitate a rapid launch, we've leveraged existing platforms. And for early stage vaccination, we focus on populations likely to be vaccinated first. We're harmonizing and coordinating across the U.S. government on the variety of platforms, for example, using common case definitions, data elements, and methods to improve comparability of results. And we've been working to combine similar platforms to improve geographic representation, increase statistical power, and generate more timely and robust VE estimates. And we do have a diversity of methods as we understand that all observation methods have limitations. Here's a summary of the studies that are being planned. And again, I don't have time to go through all of them, but I would just put you to the top row. You know, for the most immediate question of whether vaccines work as expected, we're planning a prospective study among healthcare workers. There is no large existing database enriched for this group, and so we're doing a test negative design case control study among healthcare workers, which should help us relatively quickly assess this outcome. So in summary, planned VE studies will provide a robust assessment of COVID-19 vaccine performance in real-world settings. We believe we will have early VE estimates in groups prioritized for vaccination, VE against key outcomes, and important subgroups. And data from these studies will address critical gaps and help guide future use of vaccine. Systems are in place to monitor the safety of COVID-19 vaccination in healthcare workers and long-term care facility residents. BSAFE, VAERS, and HSN will detect adverse event signals for further follow-up and evaluation. CMS, Genesis, and other claims-based and EHR systems will be used for both signal detection and evaluation. Vaccine effectiveness in healthcare workers is the immediate priority and will address the question of does the vaccine work as expected. We expect those studies to start immediately. And vaccine effectiveness evaluations in older adults, including those in long-term care facilities, are planned and include both test negative design and cohort evaluations. I hope that does justice to all the systems that we're planning and that are in place. Understand that vaccine safety and effective monitoring is a top priority for the U.S. government, and we're committed to ensuring that all these systems are in place and ready to go as soon as the vaccine program is implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Messonnier. We're going to go directly on to Dr. Patel's presentation, and then we'll have questions afterwards, so we have plenty of time. Dr. Patel.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you for having me today. And we'll be walking through today at a high level, what the USG's distribution strategy is for COVID vaccine, specifically focusing around the Pfizer vaccine product. The USG plan for COVID vaccine distribution will adjust as volume of vaccine doses increases. Early on, we do anticipate that we'll have a constrained supply where vaccine administration is really targeted towards select population groups, and distribution will facilitate that. As sufficient supply becomes available and the populations that we're trying to reach expands, our distribution network will also further expand. The schematic here outlines what our concept is for distribution at a very high level. All vaccines will be ordered through CDC's COVID vaccine ordering systems. For the Pfizer vaccine, we will be providing those vaccine orders directly to the manufacturer for distribution to administration sites. We've been working very closely with our state and local partners to make sure that they have plans in place to identify providers that are able to receive, store, and use the vaccines for the specific populations that they're trying to reach. These administration sites will be receiving the Pfizer vaccine product, and they should expand as well over time as the targeted populations we're trying to reach expand. In addition to the hospitals, the vaccination clinics that have been set up to support early distribution and use of Pfizer vaccine, we have also set up a program called the Long-Term Care Facility Pharmacy Program. This federal program is a partnership that allows for jurisdictions to be able to opt into the program, allowing for on-site vaccination support to occur to long-term care facilities. Our pharmacy partners would be providing the on-site vaccination support for those facilities that actually sign up for the program. Also like to draw your attention to the Operation Warp Speed Coordination Cell at the bottom of the slide. The idea is for us to be able to have a clear understanding of what is happening in terms of supply of vaccine as well as administration and uptake information throughout the vaccination program. Focusing a little bit more on the long-term care facility plan, in order for us to be able to reach skilled nursing facilities, we have been working to bring skilled nursing facilities on board to the program and opt in. Once a state determines that they're ready to expand vaccination to reach staff and residents within skilled nursing facilities and other assisted living facilities, the program would be turned on. Right now, we do have a very high percentage of the skilled nursing facilities within the United States that have opted in to receive services from this federal program. The vaccine characteristics of the Pfizer program are very different and unique compared to other vaccines that we've seen before, and they do impact distribution, site storage, as well as administration requirements. The details depicted on the slide are very specific to the Pfizer program and outline some of the challenging requirements of the vaccine that have to be implemented in terms of vaccine distribution and storage sites. The additional planning that is needed for distribution, storage, handle, and use has been underway for the last few months based on the information that we know for the Pfizer product. There is a required dedicated cold chain given that the product has to be managed at ultra-low temperature requirements. In addition, the timing of the vaccine ancillary supplies, which include the diluent as well as dry ice replenishment, has also been a challenge. We have built the distribution system in a way that all three of these elements will arrive within a 36-hour period of time. So once the vaccine is there, these additional pieces will also be delivered to the vaccination sites. Another major challenge that we've had with the product is the actual minimal order requirement. 975 doses is the smallest volume of product that can be ordered for the Pfizer vaccine. This has posed challenges, especially in rural areas of the country where that volume of product is more difficult to manage. And it's also been a planning factor that at the local level has been used to determine where exactly the product should be received. There's also a new element of the thermal shipping container that has been introduced with this product. The container allows for the movement and shipment of the vaccine from one site to another and allows it to be managed in the ultra-low temp conditions. There is training required with using this thermal shipping container and staff being able to be trained on the monitoring, the dry ice replenishment requirements, as well as understanding how to manage the product over time, how many times to open the container, and the details have also been part of the training and what we're getting vaccination sites ready for. There's also complexities with mixing and using the product. It is a little bit different than other vaccines that we've seen as far as the diluent being required, how the product is drawn up, and also how quickly the product needs to be used. Once diluted, we do have a 6-hour period of time in which the vaccine needs to be administered in, and that has also been factored in and built into the planning at the administration site level. Lastly, we do have inventory planning that is underway to ensure that there's sufficient supply available for administration. This includes ensuring that administration sites have actual clinic planning times, that they're able to have enough people come to manage the 975 doses for each of the trays, and the planning for the actual clinics, as well as the planning for the second dose. So second doses are required, the timing, 21 days, and any cushion that we have beginning or ending from the 19 to 23 days that we saw in the clinical trials. What exactly that looks like and how that gets operationalized and implemented is also part of the planning factors. Second dose reminders are part of ensuring that people come back for that second dose, and additional strategies are also underway. So with that, I'd like to pause and turn it back over to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. We're going to have time for just a couple of questions at this point. Dr. Levy.
Hello. I have a brief question for Dr. Messonnier. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very helpful. You needed to move very quickly through some very important information about the safety surveillance systems that are in place to monitor the progress of coronavirus vaccine. I did have a question. You described a number of interlocking national systems that would mirror vaccine safety. I wanted to know if there's any consideration or plans for also integrating these systems with international efforts at monitoring coronavirus vaccine safety. For example, World Health Organization, WHO. There's also an international network of special immunization services and others. So that's my first question. My second question has to do with vaccine effectiveness. You mentioned some key subgroups that you'll be monitoring vaccine effectiveness in. Those all made good sense. It went by quickly, but I didn't see teens or maybe even eventually younger children listed among those special populations, but I would imagine they would be of interest as well, and I'd value your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you for easy questions. The answer to both questions is yes. There's actually a WHO coordinated group looking at sharing data for both safety and effectiveness, and coordinating across the globe on that. In addition, we are working directly with collaborators in the UK and in Canada to make sure that we're sharing information as quickly as possible. And we're already gearing up to help a number of countries that are for immunization campaigns. The answer to the second is definitely yes. I didn't put it on the slide because authorization for those groups was not really up for discussion today, but certainly it will be really important to be able to monitor both safety and effectiveness in an enhanced way in those groups. Yeah, period.
And the final question from Dr. Kurilla. After that, we'll have to move on.
Thank you. This is for Dr. Messonnier. You described a very comprehensive assessment, aggregation, and collation of a lot of safety signals, and I'm wondering, the intention for that group, is that to provide ongoing advice to the people who would be distributing the vaccine, potentially administering it, public health officials, or is that primarily to be focused towards the FDA in terms of refinement of the EUA itself? What's the real focus of all of that safety assessment? Where's it going?
I mean, I think it can be for multiple uses. However, our standing up of an ACIP work group is to be a part of our ACIP recommendations, that is the recommendations for use of the vaccine. CDC and FDA and all the USG partners coordinate, collaborate, work together in the safety landscape every day on all our routine vaccines. And as you look at our systems, you'll see how intertwined they are. So any information, for example, that we get will be shared quickly with the FDA, as well as putting these systems in place so that our advisory committee can review it. I also might say that CDC and FDA are also discussing a contract with NASEM, the National Academy, so that we also have them to provide expert independent review of vaccine safety issues that may arise in the COVID-19 vaccination program. So in addition to everything we've set up, we're also setting up that collaboration contract with NASEM so that we also have them ready if we need to help adjudicate a safety signal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to both of our CDC.
Thanks for taking me to this advisory committee today on one of its most important decisions, and the title of this slide is exactly what I'm speaking to. There we go. So what are these considerations? Well, there are two, and they're intertwined. First are the ethical considerations, which concern the questions about what is the right thing to do with the placebo group in this case. The second class of considerations are epistemic, concerning what we know or what we believe, which is determined by the strength and totality of the evidence. That's what's generated by the designs we are already using and the ones we'll use going forward, which might be the most consequential thing that we discuss today. Now, I will be speaking about ethical issues, but I am not a card-carrying or PhD-carrying bioethicist. But I've enjoyed working with many, and I want to acknowledge, before I talk, the contribution several have made to my remarks today, although the views and ethical lapses are my own. They are Professors Nancy Cass and Ruth Baden from Johns Hopkins and David Magnus from Stanford. Now, there are a lot of questions embedded in what should happen with the designs and particularly the control groups in studies going forward. This slide outlines a lot of sub-questions, but I think the title of the presentation pretty much captures it. If an EUA for this and other vaccines are granted, what do we do with the placebo control groups in this trial and potentially in ongoing and in upcoming trials for the next vaccine? Now, I want to start with a set of ethical preliminaries. I'll start with something that seems very basic, but I can't tell you how many committees I've been a part of and that I've watched whose conversations have founded on this simple issue. We're going to be dealing with ethical dilemmas here, but it's worth thinking about what an ethical dilemma is. So an ethical dilemma is not a choice between right and wrong. That's what we write to advice columnists for. An ethical dilemma is a choice between two actions that are both ethically justifiable under different moral frameworks or principles. In that sense, it's a competition between two right actions, which of course is exactly what makes it a dilemma. We face this in every clinical trial, particularly on data monitoring committees, the tension between actions that are good for an individual, which in the current setting might mean giving them a vaccine immediately, and what's best for society, which might mean holding off on that vaccine so placebo-controlled randomized trial can continue. Resolution of ethical dilemmas always requires compromise that balances the competing dictates and minimizes physical harms or ethical wrongs which are caused by unfairness, violations of autonomy, or actual personal or societal harm. Now, to continue, our ability to conduct clinical trials, which is to experiment on each other, is something that society gives us permission to do. We don't need that permission to do chemistry or biology experiments. And because the procedures and oversight for RCTs are so structured and standardized, it's easy to forget how fragile that permission to conduct RCTs is. But anybody who's worked as an institution whose research enterprise has been completely shut down because of a single ethical lapse knows that this trust can never be taken for granted. And it's continually earned and re-earned through fair and transparent processes to determine what's acceptable. And that's what we're doing today and why it's so important that we're doing it in public. Now, final preliminaries, which is ethical acceptability depends often on context or background conditions. Offering a placebo subject the vaccine can be judged quite differently depending on whether the evidence, we have about efficacy and safety, and whether or not that participant can actually get the vaccine outside of the trial. And both of those are part of the context today. Now, epistemic preliminaries. I'll start by saying something that shouldn't be too controversial, which is that RCTs, or randomized controlled trials, provide the most reliable knowledge about the relative efficacy and safety of interventions, at least as permitted by the sample size and follow-up time. Obviously, we can't detect safety issues that come up after the RCT closes. A second principle is that reliable knowledge can come from non-randomized designs, and Dr. Messonnier just introduced us to some of those. This includes exactly the kinds of things she described: vaccine safety surveillance, all of epidemiology, quasi-randomized designs, natural experiments, and understanding of biologic mechanisms. These can play a critical role. And finally, there are many things to learn about these vaccines. We've talked about some already. Some of them are best learned through an RCT, but not all of them. And there are many things we can learn from these other designs that do not require RCTs. Now, finally, in this stage setting, there should be no bright lines. That is, bright lines are almost always unjustified, and they are the enemy of ethical and epistemic compromise. In ethics, this means we can't allow one moral framework or principle to trump another. We can argue about how one principle takes precedence over another, but it's not helpful to hear assertions like it's unethical to deny an effective vaccine to a placebo recipient. asserting that anything is unethical effectively shuts down the debate, and it also demonizes people on the other side. And I found it extremely healthy for committees not to use that word at all. There's a corollary in epistemology where we can have reasonable discussions about what we can learn and what we can't learn from randomized and non-randomized studies, but saying things like you can't learn anything from a study without randomization is both obviously not true and inimical to a balanced solution. Now, what do RCT participants know? Let's get into the issue of ethical obligations. All consent forms and consent processes are required to tell the patient or the participant in the study that the purpose is to produce scientific knowledge that benefits society, not necessarily them directly. They're also told, or they trust, that they won't be exposed to known serious harms not listed in the consent, and that they can withdraw at any time for any reason, and that they'll be given information arising during the trial that's highly relevant to their decision to continue. This is exactly what is in the Pfizer consent. In quite plain language, I've put it up here. I won't take the time to read through it, but it was quite explicit, and we have no reason to believe that the study was misrepresented in any way. Here in the highlighted area, you can see you're free to stop participating at any time, and the study team will tell you in a timely manner if new information is learned that would change your mind about continuing in that study, and that certainly would be an EUA. Now let's talk about, I'm sorry, skip the slide there, whether there's special obligations to placebo recipients. Obviously they have exactly the same, we have the same obligation to them that we have overall to the trial. They're free to withdraw, and because of that, the trial structure investigators shouldn't actively deny them vaccine in any way if it became otherwise available to them through a social prioritization and local circumstances. And this is consistent with the FDA position stated earlier. We'll come back to this. I would also argue that the investigators are not obligated to provide immediate vaccination in the trial before their turn of the participant is called outside the trial. First, this is not what they signed up for, and you know, there are many prioritization criteria out there by very, very good groups, and I haven't seen one that includes trial participation as a basis for jumping the queue. That is not considered a reason to get it before somebody else who might deserve it or need it because of higher risk or other considerations. But it should be reasonable when a trial participant becomes eligible through societal priorities and local ability, that they then can be provided vaccine in the trial context. So in a sense, they jump to the front of their own line. And that also binds them to the trial. It's a form of reciprocity, and it facilitates further follow-up. Now, what are some issues related to the COVID-19 context that will have relevance to these decisions? The first is the most obvious. We're in a pandemic. It's a public health emergency, which magnifies potential consequences, both positive and negative, and knowledge or ignorance of, and the consequences of knowledge or ignorance, and of action or inaction. I would say that some rules that apply in peacetime might have to be modified in war, and we're in a bit of a war right now. But I want to focus specifically on the health risks to individuals. Given the recent numbers, not yesterday's, which are particularly terrible with over 3,000 reported dying, but those in the last few weeks, a randomly chosen U.S. citizen has an average risk of dying from COVID in the next 6 months, that is by the end of May, of roughly 1 in 1,000, and the risk of hospitalization of roughly about 1 in 200. These numbers obviously vary widely by individual, and they don't include the harms from non-fatal COVID, but they're highly ethically relevant, and let's start to talk about that. So if the maximum, if the risk of death in the U.S. in the next 6 months is around 1 in 1,000, that means the maximum benefit of the vaccine for an individual, at least with respect to mortality, is also 1 in 1,000. So, or 0.1%. So imagine if we had a drug that purportedly raised cancer survival from 40% to 40.1%. If there was more to learn, and we do have that here, that's a setting where we would typically allow many placebo-controlled trials. We see this in meta-analyses all the time with multiple trials, placebo-controlled trials of agents with therapeutic benefit orders of magnitude larger than this. So while this risk obviously has huge population impact, in terms of trial ethics, it's not the kind of risk that incurs a great ethical debt to the placebo group or a prohibition on further placebo-controlled trials. Also, unlike a therapeutic drug for patients with a disease who can't change their own prognosis, many, but not all individuals can take actions that reduce their own risk of death from COVID, like masks and social distancing. So as long as there's still important things to learn about the vaccine, placebo-controlled trials should not be regarded as unethical. However, a big however, they might be infeasible, and that is a big issue. Because people may not be willing to either remain in the study or to enroll. But it's very important to not conflate the feasibility with the ethics. Now, in terms of the vaccine context, what we know, I'm actually not going to spend my time on this. You're going to hear, you've already heard a lot about the Pfizer vaccine. The only one I want to highlight is that if a participant wants to unblind themselves, in the trial, they can, if they have the resources and knowledge about which antibody test, commercial antibody tests, would unblind them. Some of them are to the spike protein, which would unblind them. Others are to the nuclear capsid, which might not. Now, in terms of the vaccine context or background conditions, what we don't know, well, this has actually already been covered. There's a whole raft of things that we don't know yet and that we want to learn, both from continued RCTs and also from observational studies. Now I want to outline a possible adverse scenario. If placebo participants who want vaccine when otherwise available and eligible are not given access within the trial in the name of scientific rigor, there may be many who respond to appeals by investigators not to seek vaccine, even if available to them. And to them, this argument doesn't apply. And we've seen that willingness to hang in studies with placebo controls in many other trials of even greater personal consequence. So it's not at all unlikely that there would be a sizable number of people who wouldn't do that on appeal. But some participants at higher risk will want the vaccine as soon as it becomes available to them. And if they can't get it through trial mechanisms, many will lose trust in the investigator and the trial itself, may leave the trial without further follow-up. They may seek vaccine outside the trial, and as more vaccines come on the market, perhaps they'll get another one that's available regionally with very uncertain effect. This will get a lot of publicity, meaning that recruitment to future vaccine trials will be that much more difficult because of a collective loss of trust. So some might appeal to the experimental status of the vaccine under the EUA as justification, as ethical justification for maintaining a placebo control. I understand why this has salience within the FDA, but I suspect that this distinction will not get much traction among future or current or future trial participants when literally millions of people are being urged to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. The point is that once the vaccine is widely available, or any vaccine, widely available and encouraged, the ability to maintain double-blinded placebo-controlled groups voluntarily for more than a nominal period, by which I might mean perhaps a few months, will likely not be under the control of the sponsor of the FDA. And some efforts to do so could undermine future trials as people don't trust that their interests will be watched out for. Now, I want to mention an important countervailing view, which is that many people out there, as we well know, are very wary about an expedited approval process and refuse a vaccine that they believe to be under-tested. They want to see those trials going to their planned end, but unless these people can be found and are willing to enroll in placebo-controlled trials, the argument about the feasibility of the trial still holds. Now, what's the Pfizer proposal for continuation, now it implicitly recognizes this reality, and it's consistent with everything I've discussed so far, except in one important regard. First, they propose urging as many people in the trial to stay as long as possible, which I think is the right thing to do. For placebo recipients who become eligible according to local or national recommendations, that's an important condition, and who ask for the vaccine, they propose unblinding them and vaccinating. For those who stay in the trial blinded, it's proposed that everyone be vaccinated after 6 months and followed for an additional 18 months to the trial's planned end. This is coupled with a robust observational pharmacovigilance plan for long-term safety monitoring that augments what the FDA and CDC are doing. While not unreasonable, I think that we have to remember that this design will not only unblind placebo recipients, will also unblind vaccinated participants who make the same request, because of course they won't know. And once unblinded, risk behavior can change. Many of the benefits of randomization within the trial are lost. So is there an alternative? And I would say there is and should be considered. There are two alternative designs that achieve the same ethical goals without compromising without compromising on the epistemic ones. That is, we can give people vaccine who are eligible and who want it, but maintain the blinding, thereby preserving trust that the investigators and regulators care both about the science and the participants. And let's talk about those designs. One is called deferred immunization. It's been presented in a variety of settings and gotten coverage. Also a blinded crossover design. And the second are active control designs, which are really not the issue for today, but I'll discuss them briefly. The first of these was developed by a biostatistician at the NIAID, the NIH, named Dean Follman. It involves blinded crossover designs. And the idea here is that the placebo, when either a placebo or vaccine recipient becomes eligible for a vaccine or requests it, exactly the situation that the Pfizer proposal describes, that the placebo recipient get the vaccine and the vaccine recipient get the placebo without being told what they were originally. So the blind is maintained. And then they are followed forward. So they stay within the trial confines and to some extent also protected by the randomization. As I mentioned, the second design is active control. At some point in the evolution of vaccine testing, we may no longer be able to conduct placebo-controlled trials of any type in settings where vaccines are available. Although it's not a question for today, at that time, when there are a lot out there, a comparison vaccine with reasonably well-established properties may have to be used in one arm in those areas where they're available. So we're not at that stage yet, but we may be within the next year in some countries. Now, in countries or regions where vaccines have seen poor distribution, it may still be possible to conduct placebo randomized trials, but that has ethical complications of its own, and I'm not going to get into that here. I want to talk just a little bit more about the deferred randomization scheme, and you see that in this picture. The idea is that we start with the vaccine and placebo arm as we already have, and then at the point when people are eligible and ask for the vaccine, you have to have both conditions. That's the point where a blinded crossover occurs. Because every participant is ultimately assigned to the vaccine arm at some point, this design actually, in some situations, in very plausible situations, can have greater or equal power to detect the duration, the sustenance of immunity, more than a standard 50-50 RCT. And you can sort of see that in the figure where you see the contrast between the vaccine efficacy in the width of the bar in the delayed vaccine arm compared to the waning efficacy in the original arm. And this increases over time, and these can be compared statistically. So you can see how this can work for vaccine efficacy. But of course, it decreases power to detect some other things like long-term safety issues and some other important parameters. but it doesn't lose them completely, as completely as designs where subjects are unblinded and effective randomization is lost. So if the standard 50-50 RCT is not reasonable or feasible, which I believe it very quickly won't be, this design is far better than any that would break the blind and break the randomization. We can, of course, also reduce some of the ethical tension in any in placebo-controlled trials by increasing the allocation ratio to the vaccine arm, but that may not be enough to solve the enrollment problem. The next slide shows another picture of this deferred vaccination schema, and it shows that it's possible. You see the crossover on the right. On the left-hand side, we have the trials as they've designed so far. On the right-hand side, you see what they look like after the crossover, which is that everybody's been immunized. But it's possible statistically to impute an unvaccinated control group to help estimate secular trends. So to finish up, I want to summarize that these alternative designs require compromises, the kind of compromises I talked about before, on both the ethical side and the epistemic side, that is the evidence. Ethically, placebo recipients don't get a vaccine as quickly as some might want, and this will become more of an issue going forward as new vaccines need to be tested with multiple ones already available through EUAs. But of course, those subjects are not being forced to enroll. But the ones who do enroll can expect to get immunized at a certain number of months going forward. As noted, placebo-controlled trials may continue to be possible in areas or populations for whom vaccines are not available, but that is complicated for other reasons. Finally, on the epistemic side, with this crossover designs, we don't learn as reliably or as quickly about long-term safety and infectiousness and other factors, although we still might learn as much or more about durability when compared with a trial that continues with the placebo arm. But as I said, that trial may not be doable. We might not have the perfect design going forward, and continued blinded observation of the deferred vaccination group can still be tremendously informative and potentially more informative than one with broken randomization, particularly in combination with observational studies of the population that we've heard about today. By reducing the ethical tension within the trial and by retaining the trust in trial testing system, it provides a way further for future studies of other vaccines. So none of these are the last words on this very difficult and complicated subject, but for today, these will be my last words. So I hope this will be helpful to you, and I welcome your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. You've given us a lot to think about and to discuss. I just wanted to start by raising one question. With the blinded crossover design, when would that take place? When an individual becomes reaches the priority listing for their group, or would that be at the time of issuance of the EUA?
So this is a subject of tremendous controversy and discussion. For the reasons I've already outlined, I don't think it should be, and this is my opinion, at the moment of the EUA. I think because otherwise they are jumping the queue, and I discussed that earlier. I believe it should be when for those subjects, they come up on the social they come up as they would come up in terms of priorities for the vaccine, and it's available to them in their area. That is, they can get it outside the trial. As soon as they can get it outside the trial, then this would kick in, because we want to keep them in the trial. If it's given at another time, we're basically giving them priority over other populations that have been deemed to be at greater risk or greater need. And the price I think we have to pay by compromising the trial, I believe, would be too high. And we don't have, again, I made this argument earlier, I don't think we have that special obligation to give them the vaccine immediately. Those are my views.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll defer questions about how feasible this is to the sponsor after the sponsor's presentation. Next,
Yep.
Dr. Levy. And please unmute and show yourself if you'd like.
Sorry, that was an error. I don't have a question.
Okay, Dr. Meisner.
Go ahead, Dr. Meisner.
I guess I answered all questions.
All right. Should we go to the next one?
Yeah, Dr. Chatterjee.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Goodman, for your presentation. It was certainly thought-provoking. I have a question with regard to the current study participants. By reviewing the documents, the briefing documents, it appears that there's a difference between participants who received the active vaccine versus placebo recipients in terms of adverse events that they experienced. And so there's a potential that people who are participating in the trial can actually, guess which arm they were randomized to.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so is there then a possibility that those who believe that they were placebo recipients might wish to withdraw in greater numbers, and that would then compromise the study as well?
Again, it absolutely could. So even going forward, it could, and that would be an issue for the statisticians and for the FDA. The point of this particular proposal is this would give them an avenue not to withdraw. That is, stay within the trial under these conditions. Now, if they didn't want to wait for their allocation to become available and their eligibility locally, withdrawing wouldn't do them anything. It wouldn't get them the vaccine any earlier. So there would be no motivation to withdraw. And also, I do think that the majority of people who signed up for these trials did so in good faith and with altruistic motives. I do believe the vast majority want their contribution to produce a valid scientific result. So I don't think self-interest completely in any way dominates. And again, yes, I do believe that there's a fair amount of unblinding just due to reactogenicity of the vaccine, and obviously non-reactogenicity of the placebo. But this, again, at the time when they might be able to get the vaccine outside the trial, this would give them a way to still contribute to the science of the trial without leaving.
So
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that did, and I was thinking about the people who would meet the priority criteria. Obviously, they must be the ones who would want to withdraw if they thought they were in the placebo arm.
Correct, and I do believe that's what I said. I do believe that could happen.
We've got a lot of questions. I think and what we're going to do is I'm going to ask all the speakers to please be available during our discussion, because we may have additional questions that come on up at that point. I'd like to move on to Dr. Kurilla, please.
Thank you, Arnold. A great presentation. So the blinded crossover design looks quite feasible. However, the caveat is that it does take longer to get to the answer. Did I hear that correctly? That's number one. But would we also be facing a first mover effect where this would basically dictate future trial design short of any vaccine having a full BLA going forward? So everyone else will have to consider this option as a de facto approach.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's why I emphasized that. I'm sorry, I see you talking, but I don't hear you. I'll just answer what I heard. I can't judge exactly what will happen in the future because fact patterns are going to change. So I hesitate to predict too much. It is possible that this might represent, as we go forward, a default design that reduces the ethical tension of these trials as vaccines, as I mentioned, become available in the area of potential enrollees in the trials. And what we then be asking them to do is not completely deny themselves a vaccine, which they could just go out and get if they themselves are eligible, but just defer it for a few months. It might be 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and that might be less of an ask. I can't say whether it will become the default. Again, it's going to be a while before enough vaccines of any type, no less just this one, are rolled out, even in the U.S. Remember also that these trials are going on all over the world. So the U.S. Places where they will not always be occurring in places where vaccines are otherwise available for quite a while. So it is possible we might evolve. I mean, I do see that there's going to be a staging where there's going to be a point or places where we cannot any longer do the placebo-controlled randomized trial. We might move to this, and then ultimately, as I said, and it might be a year or two from now, have to move to active controls. That's the evolution I see. Whether you're committing to this design going forward, harder to say. That's very complicated. And again, it's going to depend a lot on vaccine distribution and what we learn about these vaccines. If there start to be safety signals that we're not seeing right now, that could change the dynamic dramatically.
Thank you.
I'm just going to allow one more question because we have to start at noon, which is difficult to. So, Dr. will be the last question, and we're discussion as part of. We'll really want to pick where we've left off on some of these issues at that point. So, Mr. Tubman.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciated the presentation. On the blinded crossover design, so I understand this. Basically, you solve the problem of maintaining blindness. You don't have to unblind, but you do lose placebo. That group, the group that's been put into that blinded crossover system, they won't have a placebo group anymore to compare for purposes of.
That's right. You lose the contemporaneous placebo. That's right. You retain the value of having had a placebo at the beginning, though, because of the deferral, and that if there's a waning, particularly on the issue of waning immunity, obviously that difference might continue over time. So you retain some of the value of having a placebo at the beginning, but not all of the value, because things like particularly safety and other issues which might not be contingent just on the specific timing of when you got the vaccine, you will probably lose that or diminish that. You don't completely lose it. It depends on the characteristics of what it is you're measuring. There are many things we can look at still with this design, but that's why it has to be these designs coupled with the observational designs outside, which is obviously both what Pfizer has proposed, but also what the CDC and the FDA are also doing. So there's many things that can be learned outside the trial that we might have been looking to the trial to provide. Now we'll be depending more on observational designs if we move more to these trials. So we don't lose all the benefits of the placebo group, but we do lose some of them. But that may not be a practical option, which was my point.
Your position is that we should not move people into the blind blinded crossover design until they're eligible in their particular societal group for getting it anyway. I will say that we have gotten a lot of comments from folks who are in trials, like dozens of them, and their line seems to be, well, if EUA is granted, I should be offered it. I'm not asking to opine on that, but my question is, your view is you should wait till it decidedly their group comes up, but if EUA didn't cover them at all, because that is one of the possibilities we might talk about later, would that help in the ethical determination that, yes, they should definitely wait, because after all, EUA has not been granted for their group yet anyway?
I haven't thought through that whole chain. All I will say is that they don't, again, I mentioned this previously, I don't think they are, it wasn't part of the initial contract. They understood that they could do without the vaccine for much longer, in fact, than they probably will have under a deferred policy. And they still get priority under this plan. It's just they get it first within their own priority group. So it's not that they are not owed anything. There is a reciprocity here in that when their, in a sense, turn comes up, they get it first through the trial mechanism. And so they're not completely, they're not disadvantaged by being in the trial. In fact, they're advantaged, just maybe not as much as they might want by demanding it today. But as I said, I don't think the ethical calculus is such, and other groups have not thought it such, that they are necessarily owed that just by virtue of being in the trial. But they do get a benefit.
Okay, thank you very much. I know these are very difficult situations and scenarios that we will need to be talking about again during the first part of our discussion. I apologize also to those people who I haven't been able to call on. You'll have your chance during the discussion because there's going to be a lot that we're going to have to talk about in the first part of our 2-hour period that we have assigned this afternoon. I am not sure, Prada, when should we come back? Because I know some of the public presenters are ready to go at noon Eastern.
Prabha,
Or Kathleen.
there? So we're scheduled to come back at, we're originally scheduled to come back around 12 o'clock, but we still have to call in all the public speakers.